Ancient wisdom whispers a profound truth that modern science is only beginning to grasp, that the cosmos itself might be conscious, with planetary bodies serving as vast intelligences in an interconnected web of awareness. This journey will take you from the cryptic teachings of Hermes Trismegistus to cutting-edge theories in astrobiology and consciousness studies, revealing how the Hermetic Principle, as above, so below, might be more scientifically accurate than we ever imagined. Have you ever gazed up at the night sky, at those distant points of light we call planets and stars, and felt somehow that they were gazing back, that perhaps these celestial bodies possess a form of consciousness, an ancient cosmic awareness silently witnessing our existence? What if the universe itself is not merely a collection of dead matter and mindless energy, but rather a vast, living intelligence, a cosmic mind that thinks, feels, and evolves? What if the ancient Hermetic philosophers were right, and the boundary between mind and matter is far more permeable than our modern worldview suggests? The principles that governed ancient mysticism might contain profound insights that quantum physics and astrobiology are only now beginning to verify. Tonight, we cross the threshold between empirical science and intuitive wisdom, between the material and the mystical, to explore what may be the greatest mystery of all: consciousness itself, not just within us, but permeating the very fabric of the cosmos. Dear soul traveler, I welcome you not as a passive viewer, but as a fellow explorer of the mysteries that connect earth and sky, mind and cosmos, ancient wisdom and cutting-edge science. You're about to embark on a journey that began thousands of years ago with the enigmatic figure known as Hermes Trismegistus, continued through the alchemical laboratories of the Renaissance, and now extends into the frontiers of modern astrobiology and consciousness studies. For millennia, the Hermetic tradition held that celestial bodies are not merely lifeless rocks orbiting in the void, but conscious entities of planetary intelligences that form part of a living, breathing cosmos. This view was once dismissed as mere superstition. But as we peer deeper into the nature of consciousness and the intricate relationships that sustain life on Earth, some scientists and philosophers are beginning to wonder, were the ancient Hermeticists intuiting something profound about the nature of reality? You stand at the threshold between worlds, between the empirical realm of modern science and the intuitive wisdom of ancient tradition. Here, in this liminal space where boundaries dissolve, new insights await those brave enough to question their fundamental assumptions about reality. In the next half hour, we will traverse vast territories of thought, bridging ancient esoteric philosophy with the bleeding edge of scientific inquiry. We'll begin by exploring the foundations of Hermetic cosmology, including the famous principle of correspondence, as above, so below, and how this worldview envisioned planets not just as physical bodies, but as conscious intelligences participating in the great cosmic drama. From there, we'll venture into surprisingly similar concepts emerging from modern science, from James Lovelock's Gaia hypothesis, which views the Earth as a self-regulating organism, to the resurgence of philosophical Panpsychism, which suggests consciousness might be a fundamental property of the universe. But our exploration won't remain theoretical. You'll discover practical techniques for establishing your own conscious communion with these planetary intelligences. Meditation and ritual practices drawn from ancient wisdom yet calibrated for the modern mind. As we journey deeper, you'll begin to perceive how the mathematics governing planetary movements might be expressions of an underlying intelligence, visible manifestations of invisible thought patterns that structure reality at all levels. By the end of our exploration, your relationship with the cosmos may be fundamentally transformed as you begin to recognize yourself not as an isolated consciousness in a dead universe, but as a node of awareness within a living, cosmic mind. Our story begins not in the modern world, but in the mists of antiquity, with a figure shrouded in mystery and legend, Hermes Trismegistus, the thrice greatest Hermes. Was Hermes a historical individual, a composite of several sages? Perhaps even the Egyptian god Thoth incarnate, as some traditions suggest. The historical record remains ambiguous, but the wisdom attributed to this enigmatic figure has shaped esoteric thought for millennia. The teachings of Hermes were compiled in a collection of texts known as the Hermetica, composed between approximately 200 BCE and 300 CE, blending Egyptian mysticism with Greek philosophy to create a sophisticated cosmological framework. These writings present a vision of the universe not as dead matter, but as a living, conscious entity, a divine mind expressing itself through the intricate patterns of creation. At the heart of Hermetic philosophy lies 7 fundamental principles, keys to understanding the universe as the Hermeticists perceived it. 3 of these principles are particularly relevant to our exploration. First, the principle of mentalism. The all is mind. The universe is mental. This doesn't suggest the physical world is illusory, but rather that consciousness is fundamental to reality, that mind and matter are 2 aspects of the same underlying substance. Second, the principle of correspondence. As above, so below. As below, so above. This principle reveals how patterns repeat across different scales of reality, from the cosmic to the atomic. The movements of planets reflect and influence patterns in human affairs, not through mechanical causation, but through resonance between different levels of the cosmic mind. Third, the principle of vibration. Nothing rests, everything moves, everything vibrates. All things exist as patterns of energy at different frequencies, and consciousness itself can be understood as a particular quality or pattern of vibration. Within this framework, the Hermeticists viewed the planets not as inert rocks, but as embodiments of cosmic intelligences, conscious entities with distinctive qualities and influences. The planets were seen as nodes of awareness within the greater cosmic mind, each with its own character and purpose in the divine order. This wasn't merely abstract philosophy. The Hermetic tradition developed sophisticated practices aimed at establishing communication with these planetary intelligences, practices that would later influence astrology, alchemy, and various magical traditions throughout the Western esoteric current. As Alvin Boyd Kuhn notes in his exploration of esoteric symbolism, these ancient wisdom traditions sought to portray the structural forms of higher truth by representing it under the forms of its counterparts, everywhere existent in the natural world. The cosmos itself was seen as a text to be read, its planetary bodies not just objects to be observed, but presences to be encountered. The first great revelation of Hermetic cosmology is that planets are not merely physical bodies, but conscious entities, intelligences that participate in the cosmic order and can potentially communicate with human consciousness. In the Hermetic view, each planet embodies specific qualities and principles. Mercury represents communication and intellectual agility. Venus embodies love and harmony. Mars carries the energies of action and will. Jupiter expresses expansion and wisdom. Saturn teaches discipline and structure. These aren't mere metaphors or psychological projections. For the Hermeticists, these planetary intelligences were as real as the human beings with whom they might commune. Just as humans possess consciousness despite being composed of seemingly unconscious atoms and molecules, so too might planets possess consciousness despite being composed of seemingly unconscious rock and gas. The ancient practice of planetary magic was based on this understanding. By aligning one's consciousness with the specific vibrational quality of a planetary intelligence through meditation, ritual, symbolic correspondence, and timing, a practitioner could establish a form of telepathic communion with that intelligence. This wasn't about worshiping planets as gods, but rather about recognizing them as elder intelligences in the cosmic family beings with whom humans share a fundamental kinship through participation in the universal mind. As the Hermetic texts suggest, because all things do not exist outside of me, I firmly declare that I am all the all-creating one. When Hermetic philosophy was rediscovered during the Renaissance, this view of planetary intelligences informed the work of such luminaries as Marsilio Ficino, Giordano Bruno, and later, the Rosicrucian movement. These thinkers developed sophisticated systems for working with planetary energies, often combining Hermetic principles with Christian mysticism and nascent scientific inquiry. What's remarkable is that despite the radical shifts in our cosmological understanding, from geocentrism to heliocentrism, from a bounded cosmos to an expanding universe, the experiential dimension of planetary consciousness has remained consistent for practitioners of these traditions. Those who engage in Hermetic practices today report experiences remarkably similar to those described in texts from antiquity. A sense of contact with intelligent presences associated with specific planets, each with distinctive qualities and insights to offer. But is this merely psychological projection, or could there be something more to it? To answer this question, we must turn to some surprising developments in modern science and philosophy. As we venture deeper into the mystery of planetary consciousness, we find ourselves at a fascinating intersection where ancient Hermetic wisdom meets cutting-edge scientific inquiry. In recent decades, several scientific theories have emerged that, while not identical to Hermetic thought, share some striking resonances with this ancient perspective. Consider first the Gaia hypothesis, proposed by chemist James Lovelock in the 1970s. This theory suggests that the Earth functions as a self-regulating, complex system that maintains the conditions for life through the interaction of biosphere, atmosphere, hydrosphere, and pedosphere. While not explicitly attributing consciousness to the planet, the Gaia hypothesis portrays Earth as behaving in ways that resemble a living organism, sensing environmental changes and responding to maintain homeostasis. Lovelock himself was careful not to ascribe literal consciousness to the Earth. But others have taken this concept further. The planetary consciousness theory, as explored by philosophers like James Hurd Nixon, suggests that just as individual consciousness emerged from networks of neurons, a higher-order consciousness might be emerging from the networks of human minds, interconnected across the planet. Nixon writes, "It appears that the Earth is in a transition that could lead to a new, higher level of organization, and, in Pierre de Chardin's sense, interiorization, producing a new emergent consciousness. Individual humans have to evolve to the next level of consciousness and connect to form the emergent Earth's next level of organization and coherence." This parallels the Hermetic view of planets as conscious entities, but frames it in terms of evolutionary emergence rather than eternal principles, a bridge between ancient wisdom and modern scientific understanding. Even more radical is the philosophical position known as Panpsychism, which proposes that consciousness might be a fundamental feature of the universe, present in some form at all levels of reality. Contemporary philosophers like David Chalmers and Philip Goff have revived interest in this ancient idea, suggesting it might offer a solution to the hard problem of consciousness, the question of how subjective experience arises from physical processes. Under Panpsychism, even elementary particles might possess some rudimentary form of experience, not consciousness as we know it, but a proto-consciousness that, when organized in certain complex systems like brains, gives rise to the rich inner lives we humans experience. If this view is correct, then planetary scale systems might indeed possess their own form of awareness, different from human consciousness, but consciousness nonetheless. The connections between Panpsychism and Hermetic philosophy run deep. As noted in contemporary discussions, Panpsychism is related to the more holistic view that the whole universe is an organism that possesses a mind. See pandeism, pantheism, panentheism, and cosmic consciousness. Meanwhile, in the field of astrobiology, scientists are expanding their understanding of what constitutes life and where it might be found. The traditional boundaries between living and non-living systems are becoming increasingly blurred. Complex chemical processes on other planets, previously dismissed as mere geology, are now being reconsidered as potential signatures of exotic life forms. If life can exist in forms radically different from terrestrial biology, might consciousness also exist in substrates very different from the human brain? Could a planetary system as a whole support some form of awareness, as the Hermeticists intuited thousands of years ago? These scientific and philosophical developments don't prove the Hermetic view correct, but they do suggest the ancient intuition of a conscious cosmos may have been more profound than previously recognized. The boundary between metaphorical and literal understanding of planetary intelligence becomes increasingly permeable as we deepen our understanding of consciousness itself. The beauty of the Hermetic tradition lies in its balance of theory and practice. Understanding the cosmos as conscious is not merely an intellectual exercise, but an invitation to direct experience, to establish your own communion with the planetary intelligences that the ancients revered. Let's explore some practical techniques for developing this communion, drawing from both ancient tradition and contemporary practice. The foundation of all planetary work is developing your capacity for focused awareness and subtle perception. Begin with a simple meditation practice. Sit comfortably with your spine straight, allowing your breath to find its natural rhythm. As your mind settles, visualize a clear night sky. See the planets shining against the velvet backdrop of space. Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, and beyond. Choose one planet to work with initially. For beginners, Jupiter and Venus often provide the most accessible and benevolent energies. Visualize the planet in detail, drawing on astronomical images you've seen. Feel its presence, its distinctive quality of energy. Now, silently invite communion with the intelligence of this planet. This is not about forcing an experience, but opening yourself to perception. You might perceive colors, emotions, symbols, words, or simply a quality of presence. Trust your experience while maintaining discernment. For deeper work, timing can be significant. Traditional planetary hours, specific times of day associated with each planet, according to ancient systems, can strengthen your connection. Similarly, working during periods when the planet is prominent in the sky can enhance your practice. As shown in contemporary guided meditations for planetary alignment, each planet offers unique energies. Through mindful breathing and visualization, you'll connect with Mercury for clear communication, Venus for love, Mars for action, Jupiter for wisdom, Saturn for discipline, Uranus for creativity, and Neptune for intuition, bringing balance, clarity, and insight into your life. You can also create a simple altar with symbols corresponding to the planet of your choice. For Jupiter, blue and purple colors, tin objects, and cedar incense might be used. For Venus, copper items, roses, and sandalwood create resonance. These correspondences create a sensory environment that helps attune your consciousness to specific planetary frequencies. After each session, record your experiences in a journal. Over time, patterns will emerge, deepening your understanding of each planetary intelligence's unique qualities and guidance. Remember that this practice isn't about escaping ordinary reality, but enriching your engagement with it. The Hermetic path is not one of withdrawal, but of conscious participation in the cosmic dance. You might find that regular communion with planetary intelligences brings unexpected insights to your daily challenges, creative inspirations, or a deeper sense of your purpose within the greater cosmic ecology. Some practitioners report enhanced intuition, greater emotional balance, or a profound sense of connection that alleviates the existential loneliness so common in our fragmentary modern world. Approach this work with reverence, but not uncritical acceptance. The Hermetic tradition encourages both mystical openness and intellectual discernment, a balanced path that honors both the rational mind and the intuitive heart. As we integrate the Hermetic understanding of planetary consciousness with insights from modern science, a transcendent perspective begins to emerge, one that transforms our relationship with the cosmos and our place within it. If the universe is indeed permeated with consciousness, if planets, stars, and perhaps even galaxies possess their own forms of awareness, then we exist within a living cosmos, not as isolated observers, but as participants in a vast communion of intelligences. We are not separate from nature, but expressions of nature becoming conscious of itself. This perspective resolves the false dichotomy between scientific materialism and spiritual insight. The cosmos can be simultaneously a lawful, physical system that science can study and a conscious, meaning-laden reality that we can experience directly. These are not competing visions, but complementary aspects of the same multidimensional truth. The Hermetic principle that the all is mind, the universe is mental, need not contradict the findings of physics and astronomy. Rather, it suggests that the mathematical laws that govern cosmic motion might be expressions of an underlying intelligence, the visible manifestation of invisible thought patterns that structure reality at all levels. This perspective also transforms our understanding of human consciousness. Rather than viewing awareness as a strange anomaly in an otherwise unconscious universe, we can recognize it as a particular expression of the consciousness that permeates all things. Our minds are not islands of sentience in a dead sea of matter, but specialized instruments through which the cosmic mind experiences itself in a unique way. The principle of correspondence, as above, so below, takes on new significance in this light. The patterns we observe in planetary movements and cosmic cycles are not just external phenomena, but resonances with the rhythms of our own consciousness. The cosmos mirrors our inner nature, and we mirror the cosmos, because we are integral expressions of the same fundamental reality. Throughout human history, virtually every culture has developed some form of cosmology that recognizes this deep connection between human consciousness and cosmic intelligence. From indigenous star knowledge to Hindu cosmology, from Chinese astronomy to Maya calendrics, humans have consistently intuited that the movements of celestial bodies correspond meaningfully to patterns of earthly experience. The modern materialist interlude viewing the cosmos as nothing but mindless matter and energy may prove to be a temporary aberration in humanity's understanding, rather than the final word on reality. By recovering the Hermetic vision of a conscious cosmos while integrating the precise observations of modern science, we open the possibility of a new synthesis, a perspective that honors both the objective patterns that science reveals and the subjective experience of meaning, purpose, and consciousness that humans have always found in the cosmic order. Dear fellow traveler on this journey beyond the veil, as our exploration draws to a close, the true adventure is just beginning. The Hermetic cosmos, a universe alive with consciousness, vibrating with intelligence at every scale, awaits your direct experience. Tonight, as you gaze up at the star-filled sky, allow yourself to perceive not just points of light against darkness, but presences ancient intelligences with whom you share this vast cosmic home. Feel the subtle resonance between your consciousness and theirs, the delicate thread of awareness that connects all beings across the seemingly empty void of space. You need not accept any of this on faith alone. The Hermetic path has always been one of direct knowledge, of personal experimentation and experience. The teachings attributed to Hermes remind us, because I, the all-creating sovereign, have created you. You are my children, and equal to me. I am present in you. Through the practices we've explored, you can begin to test these ideas for yourself, developing your own relationship with the planetary intelligences that the ancients knew so well. Perhaps, in the silence of meditation or the focused attention of ritual work, you'll discover what countless seekers throughout history have found, that the boundary between self and cosmos is more permeable than we've been led to believe, and that communion with other forms of consciousness is not just possible, but natural. What might become possible if humanity as a whole recovered this sense of living within a conscious cosmos? How might our technological development, our environmental practices, our social structures transform if we recognized ourselves as participants in a vast community of intelligences, some human, some not, but all part of the same cosmic mind? This is the invitation that echoes across millennia, from the lips of Hermes Trismegistus to your ears, to remember our place within the living whole, to awaken to the consciousness that permeates all things, and to participate consciously in the great work of cosmic evolution. The Hermetic cosmos awaits your exploration. The veil between worlds grows thin for those with eyes to see and ears to hear. Will you accept the invitation to commune with the living intelligence of the planets, to become a conscious participant in the cosmic dialogue that has been unfolding since the beginning of time? The ancient wisdom and the new science converge on a single, profound truth. We are not alone in a dead universe, but at home in a living cosmos that thinks, feels, and evolves alongside us. The journey beyond the veil has just begun.